Okay, I would like to give everyone a brief history lesson of the American education system. Because when we're looking at curriculum, we're always talking about the way it was in the past and the way it's going to be in the future. Really good little book I've got. I found it on Pearson's website, so kind of sharing it instead of making people buy it. So I just kind of show you certain sections of it. And what we're looking at is the colonial period would be the start. 16, and this book talks about it begins at 1642 to 1776. The curriculum historical foundations are largely rooted in the educational experiences of colonial Massachusetts. Massachusetts was first settled mainly by Puritans. So what were the Puritans and who were the Puritans? Remember, the Puritans come from the word pure. And what the Puritans wanted was a pure interpretation of the Bible. They were, if you ever look at the history of the Church of England, you see that this Puritan sect comes in and they rise up, and they weren't like a negative thing. It was just politics was being played a lot, and the King of England was like, if these people, they're causing some stirs or some troubles. So, and then all of a sudden the Puritans said, "Hey, can we move to this new world that everyone has discovered?" Now the new world had been discovered long time before, so they were like, and he said, "Sure." Now historically, whenever a person goes to another country, like the Puritans, let me explain how that worked. So I'm like a history teacher, so I kind of like giving people that history lesson of that. What the Puritans did was they said, "Hey, can we go?" But they really didn't have much money. So the King of England says, "Sure, you can go, but there's some stipulations." And one stipulation would be the obvious: would you have to carry a charter, and a charter is usually in a big chest in the back of the boat. And they'll say, also, we'll give you, the king will give you some ships, and we'll help you get over there. Also, you're under the protection of England, so any land that you conquer or you claim is in the name of England. So it's kind of a positives and some negatives. The negatives, of course, be that you're going in the middle of nowhere and you're going to have to survive from that. But one of the big positives was you was under the umbrella of England, which was the most powerful country at the time. So when the Puritans go to the New World, they leave Plymouth and they land in Plymouth. So everybody understands why they left Plymouth and they landed in Plymouth, because that was what they named it. So maybe they could have had a better answer for what they're going to name it, but that's what they did. And with the Puritans, if you land in the New World, and your ship comes and you get off the boat and you open up your chest, and there's a charter and it says it's from the King of England, and it pretty much just says, you still have to respect the crown, and we'll come down here and we'll feed you, and we'll help you out the best we can. But then you got to start deciding how you're going to live. And the first thing the Puritans did generally when they landed, or any group of people landed, was the essentials, food, water, and shelter. So you find a good water source that is clean, or as clean as you can get. So they found some streams, and of course you find shelter. So they would usually build one big house. So you'd have a group of 50 people to 100 people, and everyone would build one big house. And that's what they did. Everyone thought, for some reason, when we teach high school, everyone thinks that everyone was just kind of, I'm going to go over here and build this house, and no, everyone built one big house. It was one huge log cabin. And there's actually some pretty good YouTube videos if you ever watch. There's a guy who went to Alaska and built a log cabin with just basically Puritan tools. It's amazing how they did that. Now, one guy did it, took about 4 months. You could do it with a group of 50 people. You could build a log cabin in no time. I would say you could build a log cabin with 50 people. Conservatively, it would take a week. Easily, it would take a week, because the hard part with a log cabin is chopping the trees and drying them out. But you could do it green, which wouldn't be a problem. But they could try that. So you build a big log cabin, and then you would start building your own houses. But what they usually did, the Puritans did, was everyone helped everyone else build their houses. So you'd build your house, and then someone would build their house, and then that's how it worked. That's how community. So what would happen to that big building that everyone built first? Because everyone was living in it while they were building their own houses. that big building that they built first became the church, and that church became also a schoolhouse. And that's where the Puritan education system came from. It was a very religious based education. Spare the rod, spoil the child. They believed in corporal punishment. They would whip their child because it was the old deluder Satan premise. The old idea that you've got to think of how the Puritans believed. The Puritans believed that if someone was acting bad, that the devil had them. That's how it works. The devil had them. So think back what the devil is. Okay, the devil was one of God's angels, Lucifer. And Lucifer goes against the throne, and a huge war in heaven takes place, and Lucifer gets thrown out along with all of his other angels into the darkness of the absence of God's love, and they're into this dark pit. And Lucifer picks himself up with his broken wings and says, "You will follow me now until I can fight God again." So that's what the Puritans were always afraid of, that there's the devil in his darkness. And when you acted bad, the devil was trying to get you to follow him. So the only way to make you act good was the same way that God got rid of the devil, was to punish and beat. And that's what they did. That's how they did it. So you get a better idea of the idea of the Puritan religion when you see that it was the idea of teaching about God's work and teaching how to read the Bible, learning math as well for whenever you're doing calculations. However, but also when a student acts bad, it was because the devil had them. So that's how our education began. And people always say that, we need to get God back into education. Okay, that was the Puritan era. That's where the God was really big, really big. So, but that was not the way education was founded in America. That was the way the Puritans brought education of the colonies. But that's a different argument altogether. The three colonial regions talks about the New England region, the Mid-Atlantic region, and the Southern region. Now the South automatically begins to suffer the education system because the South is one of the last places that would be settled in America, or the colonies. And also the South was very agrarian, very much based on a cotton plant style, and also heavy on slavery. So the education system in the South was already behind at the start because Massachusetts leads the way, and then it goes up to New York. So New York, like York, England, New England, New England. So you got to get that idea. Jamestown and Virginia after Virginia, which is England, that's the Queen. So anyway, they didn't really pick much different names. The South, though, South really lagged behind on the education system. They didn't educate the slaves. They did not educate the poor sharecropping class. They only educated the rich. So that's what's about the three colonial regions. As we move forward, the town schools emerge, and then the parochial private. So this is something that we see, which is interesting, is in the colonies you had town schools where students learned the basics, and they went to about the age of 13 or 14. Parochial or private schools emerge, and that's for the richer class students, and their goal is to get them ready for university. And of course you see what's the next thing is we're going to have a university pop up in America, and the first university of course would be Harvard. And Harvard pops up, and that becomes so. It used to be people would have to go back to England to go get their education, but now it'd be Harvard. So that was the next thing. Old textbooks over. So you already have a social class developing, a social class of the poor students learning the basic R's, and the rich students was already going towards the universities. Old textbooks, old read books. The horn book was the big book used by the Puritan era. It was actually made on a horn. So they attached parchment on it. The national period, 1770s, 1850. So you understand now what's going on with the education system within the colonies. So it's class divided, clearly. The national period was after we gained our independence. So we have our American Revolution. It's weird, It wasn't a civil war because a civil war would mean, I don't understand. What's the difference between a civil war and an American Revolution? So, yeah, so anyway, you may want to answer that question. What's the difference between a civil war and an American Revolution? So we gained our independence, obviously, and we had some issues when we gained our independence. One was we just refused to handle the slave issue, which we just put that off to the side, and we said we're not going to talk about slavery. Let's not deal with it. And one historian made it a symbolism as it was like a snake. The issue of slavery was like a snake coiled up, and instead of dealing with it at the signing of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, we put it off to the side, and we just said, let's not look under the table. Let's not deal with this yet. And of course, we'd have to deal with slavery during the Civil War. During the 1760s to 1850, we start seeing an idea that we need to have more universal education. This comes in science, progress, free education. Dr. Benjamin Rush represented this new era. In 1791, he wrote that the emphasis on the classics prejudiced the masses against institutions of learning. He wanted to get away from the Latin and the Greek. He outlined a plan for the Pennsylvania and the New Nation, the free elementary schools. Now, Pennsylvania was doing something different. Pennsylvania had the Quakers, and they were not doing corporal punishment, if you ever look at the history of that. And so Jefferson comes in, and Thomas Jefferson becomes one of the big proponents for a democratic education, a system in which taxes would pay for an education for all with the exclusion of slaves. So he starts arguing for the creation of public schools. So Thomas Jefferson really becomes one of our fathers for this idea. We bring in Webster. We all know Webster's dictionary. Webster says that America needs, and this is a big thing, America needs their own language. And that's what he started talking about. We need to have our own English language. So they start creating this, getting away from the Queen's English, and we bring in the American. And he starts talking about we need to have a good language. It should eliminate the remains of European usage, create a uniform U.S. speech. Because if you went through Boston, you heard different kind of languages constantly. And if you went to any of the major cities, especially the seaports, you saw different languages completely. So Webster comes in and starts arguing. He does the American Dictionary, and they still do that today. McGuffrey does the Readers, trying to teach American. He does the Readers, the American Virtues. So that's where we go up to the Civil War. So there's this need for public education, this need for getting things better. So we have gone from a religious Puritan-based education to, after the American Revolution, to a more Americanized democratic education, which puts the religion off to the side. And that's why you're educated now, you're graduate students. When you hear someone say we need to bring God back to education, the American education system did not bring in God. It was the Puritan English system that did. Now, I'm religious as well. However, that's one of the most historical, inaccurate things. We need to bring back God, because that's before the American education system. Because even Benjamin Franklin, all the founding fathers said we need to have separation of church, because they saw what religion did to the English throne and how all that works. In fact, the Puritans were escaping that. So you see, it's good to be educated. So you see all that thing right there. So the 19th century, which is the 1800s, obviously, we see that there's several good minds pop up here. Spazzazi, General and Special Methods, Froebel, the kindergarten movement, Frederick Froebel, the German educator, developed what he called the kindergarten, or the children's garden. He said that 3- and 4-year-olds should believe that their schooling should be organized around play and individual group interest and activities. I love this idea of Froebel, of this idea that we have a kindergarten, a children's garden. And I think that it's a slap in the face what we have done to kindergarten through the years. We have taken kindergarten from an idea of socialization and encouraging the students to love, trust, and freedom. And some schools are actually testing in kindergarten They're actually bringing so it's like, come on, it's supposed to be about enjoying the education and learning, because you're going to have plenty of testing when you get to first grade. I'd like to pause here and talk to you real quick. Fast forward to this thing called Head Start. Some of y'all have heard about Head Start and kindergarten. Kindergarten and Head Start. Head Start was a federal funding program. It's a federally funded program, and that's what Head Start is. And if you ever hear the phrase, I went to Head Start, that's usually like a federal funded program. It came out, it tried to get people ahead of the curve for first grade. But according to the state standards, children do not have to go to kindergarten. First grade is mandatory in Mississippi, so a child can actually stay at home until first grade. I've talked to several first grade teachers, and they said they're seeing a major issue with children not going to kindergarten. So when they go to first grade, they don't have the social skills, they don't have the trust, the enjoyment of the education system, and some of them actually are so behind that they have not. One person said they didn't know the colors, they couldn't identify colors, and they could not identify their name, or they could not. And that was the big thing, was they said colors. Like students in first grade could not identify their own colors. As we continue on, we have moral and intellect. We have these great thinkers come in. Spencer comes in. Monitorial schools was a European invention based on Joseph Lanchester's model of education. It spread quickly to the U.S. urban centers, where the immigrant population was increasing. Bright students, monitors, are served as instructors. The teachers taught the lesson to the monitors, who presented the material to their classmates. So it was the idea of kind of a teacher training. So instead of having a teacher who knows everything, the teacher who knew one thing would teach the supervisors. So it was kind of a good way. They did this in the inner cities to speed up reading. So they would have one teacher who would teach monitors how to read, and then the monitors would spread that across. So it became kind of like a school system. They did that. They especially did that in the factories. Common schools were established in 1826 in Massachusetts. These were state-passed laws requiring every town to choose a school board to be responsible. So the first public school was in Massachusetts, 1826. We start seeing laws pop up, and we start seeing school boards pop up. And they start saying we need, and they actually separate it from religion. They separate it from religion, and they said we need to have common schools. So why did they do this? Why did they create these common schools? They did it because there was so many different kind of religions going on now. There were so many different kind of education systems going on. So they said we need to have a basic curriculum. So they kind of shook the tree and got rid of the religious interpretations, and they said we're going to have what we think is necessary: reading, writing, arithmetic. So that's what they did. So common schools comes into play. The patterns: elementary schools begin. There's no consensus on when, but we start seeing elementary schools, and we start seeing secondary schools. The U.S. high school was established by 1900. Most children aged 6 to 13 were enrolled in public education in elementary school, and about 11% from 14 to 7 were enrolled in public secondary schools. So we start seeing the creation of the secondary schools. That's good. Finally, we start seeing some national attention to these. The academies start popping up. The academies begin to emerge, and what they are is trying to encourage people to go to colleges, and we start seeing the academies pop up. So we see an expansion of our education system. We start seeing the high schools emerge, and then we see the transitional period from 1893 to 1918, kind of the populist movement was going on. You kind of see just not much going on. But then we start seeing, and this is the big thing, the national movements. So from the Puritans to the common school movement, we start seeing the expansions of the secondary school, the high school, the academies, universities start popping up. So finally we said we need to get a hold of this, and to get a hold of this, we create what is known as national committees. The Committee of 15 emerges, and you don't have to know all the facts on that, but you start seeing commissioners. The Committee of 10 starts emerging. And in case you're social studies, the Committee of 10 spawns out the social studies movement, which became known as the National Council for Social Studies. So we start seeing we need to have national standards on this. See? So education in America started at the state level and expanded, and then the national government got involved. Nowadays, it's kind of backwards. Now it's nationally motivated. Kind of got away from our state goals. And then we start seeing other reformers start popping in, and then it continues on. The NEA, the National Education Association, we start seeing the field of curriculum is born, and then we start seeing the birth of this idea of developing curriculum. But this is, I kind of want to do like a first phase of it, of the idea, and then we start seeing other things, current focus, the No Child Left Behind, everything else. So education, the whole purpose of this, I didn't want to give you a big history lesson. The whole purpose of this is education starts at a smaller level and expands up. Now it's at the national level. Question, do we need to pull back and let the states run it like they've been doing for years? Interesting question. Now, still a subtopic of historical foundation of curriculum. You see all that, and then we'll continue on. Hope you enjoyed the lecture.